Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you. And I must say that Teddy is a tough speech to follow. Actually, it is because of teachers like Teddy that I am here. I moved to Rochester, New York because of the wonderful housing market. And I came from Washington, D.C., which is my hometown. I've worked for the National School Boards Association. I've worked for the American Psychological Association, doing policy and advocacy for special education with school psychology and the practice of psychology in K-12 schools. I also have been the mental wellness program coordinator for the National Education Association's nonprofit affiliate, the NEA Health Information Network. That work came to me after the massacre at Columbine in 1999. That was as a result of a significant trauma. And I did my homework when I chose Rochester to move to. I chose Rochester because we have an incredible housing market. I also chose Rochester because I have been doing violence prevention work for years. And Rochester is the most dangerous city in New York State. But Rochester also has incredible assets. And the work that I did for NEA was informed by wonderful people across the country about what makes us resilient. We can't control all of the risk factors that our kids are going to be exposed to. And we've heard a lot from people here about the impact of poverty. But we also know that the middle class is shrinking and that increasingly middle-class people are becoming poor. Recently, I took a trip down to Washington for a meeting, and I stayed a little bit longer after my meeting, and I attended an income inequality policy forum that had some tremendous speakers. Pulitzer Prize-winning former New York Times journalist Hedrick Smith was one of the speakers. He's the author of a book titled Who Stole the American Dream? And he identifies something called the Powell Memo, which was written in August of 1971 in Richmond by Lewis Powell, who was appointed to the Supreme Court 2 months after he wrote the memo. And basically the strategy in the Powell Memo explains a lot to me. What it boils down to is big business in August of 1971 was scared. We had a lot of different things happening. Women's rights, civil rights, Ralph Nader, the Environmental Protection Agency was created. So big business was concerned. And the strategy in the Powell Memo said, big business, send lobbyists to Washington and buy up the media to control the message to influence voters to vote in our best interest, not their best interest. That explains a lot to me as a Washingtonian, seeing what happened to my hometown as it mushroomed with lobbyists and money and corporate interests. And I'm very concerned because having worked in public education for so many years, and particularly around the issues of violence prevention and promoting school mental health, and being concerned about the mental wellness of our teachers, because teaching is inherently a stressful profession. But we now have kids who are starving for parental attention. And when they come to school, they're starving for adult attention. With the standards and race to the top testing, I see that the teachers that I have advocated for, they have less time. They have less professional autonomy to be the responsive teachers, like what we heard from Teddy. And that's what the kids need, because teaching and learning happens in the context of relationships. It doesn't happen in the context of rigid standards and high-stakes standardized testing. And as I see that the trauma in our city here is quite high, and I believe as we're seeing so many things across the country, higher productivity, more hours spent at work, troops returning home, there's going to be increasingly exposure to trauma. And it is teachers and the connections to schools, not the buildings, but to peers and teachers and other school staff that are what make our kids resilient. And the Common Core and Race to the Top does not allow for that to happen the way it used to be able to happen. And yet, here in Rochester, we have so many protective factors that we could bring. In addition to the wonderful housing market, Monroe County has one of the best library systems in the country. We don't have food deserts in this city. We have the public market. We do have a public transportation system that serves our city quite well relative to other cities. We have real strengths in this city. And if we're hamstrung by an education reform policy that basically when students' test scores go down, corporate profits go up. I don't think we really need to get mired in the details. When it boils down to when students' test scores go down, corporate profits goes up, that's a problem, and we can do something about that. Thank you.